I'm Linda Reinstein. I'm the co-founder of the Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization, commonly known as ADAO. And we co-founded ADAO almost 20 years ago when personal tragedy hit our family and many others that we met along the way. So since then, we've become the largest independent nonprofit dedicated to education, advocacy, and community support, all to prevent asbestos exposure to eliminate all asbestos-caused diseases. So ADO remains so busy in the forefront. We are the leading stakeholder for prevention and policy. So while we work on both of those facets, we also work in Washington, D.C. So we've been dedicated with many others to passing an actual comprehensive ban of all fibers and all uses. It's known as the Reinstein Ban Asbestos Now Act. And with any luck, your conference, you'll be hearing about it in September. And in the meantime, we have a conference also in September. It'll be our 20th, where we gather the leading experts and voices to talk about what's the latest for treatment, prevention, and advocacy. Because if we don't come together, then our voices are muted or lost. And we do know prevention remains the only cure. So since the EPA tried to ban asbestos in 1989 and it was overturned in 91, there's so many groups like ADO that have been working to truly pass comprehensive ban legislation. It's pretty disappointing to know that last year the EPA promulgated a single fiber limited use ban of only chrysotile in 6 conditions of use. Clearly not a ban. So we're all hands on deck trying to pass the Reinstein ban bill. But it's important while we talk about this is that we have to raise awareness to really promote prevention. I think there's a 95% chance the Part 1 rule is either remanded back to EPA or completely vacated, which means we start over again without an asbestos ban of 1 fiber in 6 conditions of use. So that's a great question. So first, it's a limited ban. We say that it's a landmark step forward, but it only banned chrysotile asbestos in 6 conditions of use. The really tough part as a mesothelioma widow for me, we've worked on this for over 20 years. This Part 1 limited rule is actually back in the same courts that overturned the ban in 1989. It is very, very likely, with the pressure that's challenging the efficacy of the rule, that it'll be remanded back to EPA or completely vacated. What does that mean? It means we start over and we don't have a ban. So that's the tough part, is because of all the misinformation, the long latency period from exposure to possibly disease presenting, that's 10 to 50 years, a nearly invisible fiber, and industry's inability or resistance to testing and staying with enforcement and compliance, exposure continues today. So it is clearly not a thing of the past. We don't have to look too far in my town of Los Angeles. After the LA fires, it was abundantly evident that legacy asbestos remains a fierce threat for public health. In fact, 30 to 50% of the homes that were involved in the fire contained asbestos. And that's really important because remediation, renovation, all of those different aspects that you know so well, you have to have proper cleanup. So talking about late 70s and early 80s is a deadly myth. It is really important to everyone sitting there today during your presentation to know that your industry is so important, that legacy asbestos is a threat. And if you don't test and abate and treat it as a carcinogen, more people will be exposed. This date I've heard for decades, that after 1980s you don't have to worry. That is a deadly myth. And it's so important for your industry to come together and educate people. There's no rewind button when it comes to asbestos exposure. I know that all too well. I watched my husband, Alan, pass away in front of myself and our then 13-year-old daughter. If you can do something to prevent exposure, then we should all come to the stakeholder table and make that happen. When there's confusion, there's more exposure. And if there's more exposure, it's simple math. There's more people that'll be diagnosed with a deadly, preventable asbestos-caused disease. So the misunderstandings run rampant. I think during natural disasters, fires, floods, etc., There's so much fear when you're in the throes of those disasters. That's not the time to educate anyone. So if we can come out, and that's what ADO has been working on for 20 years, we use technology, our chat bot, lots of our conference, a lot of information angles to get the word out about prevention and that asbestos is a carcinogen. Because if we don't set the facts straight, chaos and doubt surrounds the issue, which means there is more exposure. The ramifications are huge. It's expensive in dollars and lives when asbestos exposure obviously impacts an individual, their family, and community. The difficult problem that we have is the disconnect between the so-called number. If we just pull from the air, possibly late 70s or early 80s, that does an injustice to the knowledge that we actually have. We at ADO say, hear asbestos, think prevention. There's a ripple effect. If a worker goes in to do abatement and possibly they're either untrained or they think the job is clean and has no contamination, they might go in without PPE. They might wear it home and hug their family, expose their child. So the ripple effect to exposure is huge. That's why the year for me is really a deadly myth. And we have to do a better job raising awareness. But after Hurricane Sandy in the New York area happened, I had a family call me up. They were so upset. They saw the individuals boarding the bus that the kids had been on, going out to do cleanup, like a good project, a good Samaritan project. Then the workers came back onto the bus. Then the bus offloaded the workers, then picked up the children. There was no decontamination. So if we don't embrace best practices, we can be guaranteed exposure will continue. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And for some people, they might only hear the 11 o'clock news and there's an asbestos legal commercial on. But let me tell you what it's like in our homes. So when Alan was exposed to asbestos, obviously, he had no clue that that lethal fiber was entering his lungs. Almost 50 years later, he's diagnosed with mesothelioma. That disease doesn't just impact the patient, it impacted our entire family and community and our lives forever. When a patient's undergoing treatment like Alan elected to have what's called an EPP. They surgically removed a rib, resected, that means removed his left lung, stripped off the lining around his heart, the pericardium, and surgically replaced his diaphragm, all for more time. So these are catastrophic surgeries that patients have to endure because they were exposed to asbestos. And the hardest part for the families is what I can share very personally is when the patient and loved one does die, a family is left behind. We're left there to try to pull the pieces together. And I think for ADO's work, what has made us so impactful is we've been able to tell the stories of many people, not just about Alan. It's the hundreds of thousands of Alans who have been diagnosed, possibly suffered or died from an asbestos-caused disease. This is real. 40,000 Americans die every year of preventable asbestos-caused diseases. It's kind of like if you were in Boston and you went to watch the baseball game at Fenway, and that entire stadium was filled with roaring fans. However, those fans didn't come home that night. That's the magnitude of 40,000 Americans that die every year. We have a long way to go on prevention, and it really starts with awareness. So I believe that awareness, education leads to prevention and policy, and ultimately elimination. I'm glad your conference is talking about it. This is a very important subject matter, and I hope everybody throws out that ridiculous year that was sort of pulled from the sky and recognize testing can save lives, and the lives that you save might be your own. Well, at the end of this conference, I hope your attendees will think about joining us in New York City on the 12th and 13th for our 20th Asbestos Awareness and Prevention Conference. You're all welcome to come hear the experts and the leaders in that space. We'll be talking about firefighters, first responders. They know very well about legacy asbestos. So come on over to New York. And if you can't make it to New York, Join us April 1st to the 7th for Global Asbestos Awareness Week. That's where your industry can profile what you do to prevent exposure. There's so many ways we can work together, and I truly believe together we do make change happen. Thank you.